Good evening and welcome to the Nice Guys Radio podcast. I'm Brennan Ames.
And I'm Daniel Mundy.
And Dan, what do we have on the menu for tonight's podcast?
So, in researching for this progress, I found a really cool and I think unique thing that arose from the Civil War, and that are these bullet carvings or trench art, as they're called in the relic world. And they're basically made up of these lead bullets that Civil War soldiers would use during the war. And the soldiers would whittle away at these pieces and turn them into things like art or turn them into game pieces. And I got a couple examples of those on the screen right now.
Okay, yeah. So we see dice here. I'm assuming they use that for some sort of board game or something. I believe these are acorns, I believe, up here. And then it seems we've got a whole lot of more, I guess, dark type of art over here with the skull, the tombstone, and I believe that's the Mother Mary all the way to the left as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What I noticed straight away is that you can kind of tell from the pictures we have here that they were made for a multitude of reasons. Like you said, you pointed out we got some game pieces and some things used probably for gambling or just wasting some time on a board games with comrades while you're at camp. And then we also have the more artistic things. And when you look a little further into that, the research shows that a good portion of these bullet carvings actually arise due to simply the lifestyle at camp or the time at camp that soldiers would have. As far as the carvings and the more artistic things, we found that oftentimes this is because the average soldier would only fight 1 out of 30 days. The other 28 to 29 days were pretty much just spent at camp, getting exposed to the elements, just waiting for fighting to happen, defending positions. And this kind of came from that. That's more of the art aspect of it, as well as the boredom that would arise, and you kind of need to fill the time with anything that you can find. And your main resource that you have is these lead bullets and ammunition. So why not make something out of it?
And I did find it really interesting, Dan, that they used the one piece of almost necessary equipment to make these bullet carvings. This is what they have to use to kill the other side, to defeat the enemy. And yet they were so bored that they took their main, source of fighting to make these artistic expressions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you have to imagine that some of it is a little bit ironic that they're using the things that they're given to defend themselves to turn them into things that are just barely passing the time. They're kind of wasting away at this item that they definitely need the most during the war. And that just kind of goes to show what the conditions were really like. Although there were a lot of fighting, most of the time for these soldiers was meant that spent at camp being exposed to the elements, and this is kind of what you had to do to make the time pass by. Um, Also, interestingly enough, they weren't just used to pass the time for boredom. As we digged a little bit deeper, we found that they were used almost as a resource. If you want to get into a little bit more of that.
Yeah, so obviously on the screen here we see a lot of, playful designs, artistic designs, but these bullets carvings weren't only used for that. A lot of them had practical uses. Just some examples here that I found on virginiarelics.com. People used them as a nipple protector when they were fighting that one day out of the month. Fish hooks were a huge piece as a type of carving that people would use. Obviously, the conditions were less than ideal during these camps, and with rations being pretty bleak, they would make fish hooks and make homemade fishing rods so that they could fish out of local rivers and lakes to try and get some sort of protein in when the food was lacking, and as well as buttons because during the course of war, their what's it called? Their uniforms would get pretty battered, so they would make buttons to replace.
That's really interesting, especially the fishhook thing. The buttons I kind of understand because at the end of the day, you're mainly worried about food and water, and your rations to survive on, not so much the clothes. The clothes were important, so I definitely understand the buttons aspect of it. That makes a lot of sense to me. The rations, the fishhook part speaks a little bit more to me concerning the rations that the soldiers were getting. The fact that they had to make these fish hooks tells me that they were definitely running out of resources. To take something like this to have to make it into a fish hook in order to get food to survive kind of sheds a little bit of light on what that life might have been like surviving the Civil War. It was less about necessarily surviving the battles, as it shows with the time that they spent at camp, but more about surviving the exposure, surviving the starvation, the dehydration. That's kind of what I'm grasping from them having to turn these into fish hooks.
Exactly. And it wasn't just boredom as well that I found that people were making these. A lot of soldiers saw superstition in a lot of these. They carried these little designs with them, and for the ones who survived, they always saw it as their good luck charm. It kept them away from the Grim Reaper. As well as soldiers would trade these between platoons. During to pass the time. I think it really helped build camaraderie in a very dire situation, and it was a way for all the soldiers to bond together.
That's making a lot of sense to me. I definitely want to point out a couple of things going on the picture on the right. Just to dive back a little bit more into the artistic version of it, just because we covered kind of the utility of these bullets so far. But I'm seeing religious symbols, and that kind of goes along with what you're saying that these soldiers might have used these as good luck charms, thinking that having this charm whittled away into this bullet might protect them in battle. It almost looks like some saintly figure, or like you said, it speculated it might have been the Mother Mary on that bullet all the way on the left of the right picture. We see a cross as well, and the one in the middle. I particularly want to bring attention to the one on the right here. The one on the right here seems to be a skeleton, or at least a skull and some sort of bones underneath it. What do you think that might have said as far as understanding the psyche of the
Hmm
soldier who might have possibly made this bullet?
hmm Yeah, I mean, I know it's definitely tough to see with not a ton of background, but I think somebody who is sitting there giving grave detail to this carving. I think they definitely had death on the mind. I don't think they were right in the brain when making this carving because I think obviously the more you spend in war the crazier and the farther your mind gets away from reality. So I think the soldier was definitely struggling, and I think this was a bit of an outlet for him. I do think it's a little funny in the middle here that even that soldier while making the tombstone made sure to put yank on it. It was, well, probably one can assume, a Confederate soldier making that one.
That definitely makes some sense. Maybe, like you said, some form of an outlet for the one in the middle, possibly some sort of comedic relief. If you're a Confederate soldier and you're making a tombstone for a Yankee out of your bullet, that might have gotten a laugh out of camp at the time. So maybe it's just a way to have some comedic outlet. But on the one on the right, I think you're absolutely correct. I think it does kind of show that that soldier could have possibly been struggling. The unimaginable mental toll of war, to be able to draw such a ghastly image, I think speaks a lot about how life might have been like for that soldier during that time period.
hmm Yeah. Do you have anything else to add for us tonight, Dan?
No, I think that about hit all the bases. I think it's really interesting to see how we have all three of these elements of art and resourceful use utility, as well as what seems to just kind of be at sometimes a way to get past some boredom as an outlet, but also times it kind of could be a life or death situation with the things like the fish hook.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, that's all for us tonight. We hope you guys learned a little bit and got to enjoy some really cool art this evening. From myself, Brennan,
And I'm Dan.
take care.